Hey future self, it's me, you. Speaking to you from the year 2020. Well, 2021 now it is actually, but I'm going to talk to you about 2020. Everything is fine. Basically, it's a really bland, unremarkable period of human history. Every day is the same and everyone agrees that things are just fine. And in this video, I'm going to remind you, my future self, what our favourite soundtracks are from 2020. As usual, I gotta mention right off the top that this list making business is a rather imperfect art, and my list today is different than it would be tomorrow. And as you probably know, as my future self, that's who I'm talking to, no one else, I've decided to allow myself 20 entries on my list this year, it being 2020 and all. And if I'm making up the rules as I go, here are 10 honourable mentions. I'm not going to discuss all these in depth, just have a gander, they're all great. Interesting little statistic is that on my list this year I have 4 TV scores, 8 film scores and 8 game scores. I was surprised how many game scores there were, but then 2020 was arguably kinder to gaming than it was to film. Okay, here's number 20 on my list of favourite soundtracks from 2020. Too loud, guys, too loud. Turn it down. The latest music for Assassin's Creed sees the return of Jesper Kyd and Sarah Schachner composing with Ina Selvik on this tonally magnificent score. It's ethereal and often dark. It's just got such unique textures. It's perhaps not as much melodic fun as a lot of the past Elder Scrolls scores have been, but it's got a really cool vibe. Check out that bold, heroic action. That is a solid main theme there for Miles Morales. And if I'm honest, there's actually not a ton of other stuff on this score that stands out to me apart from that main theme. But it is a killer main theme. And how lucky is Spider-Man, just in general in the 21st century? He's had so many cool main themes. It's good stuff. This soundtrack has a lot of music by a bunch of composers, and not all of it is my jam. There's a lot of different styles in there, but conversely, a whole portion of it is very much my jam. There's some very exciting, fun pieces in there. Much of it is new arrangements and orchestrations of classic pieces from the original Final Fantasy VII, which is awesome, but there's some new stuff in there as well. It's basically just such a long album though, it's like 8 discs. One day I'll maybe even listen to the whole thing. Gareth Coker, what a composer, and what a beautiful theme right there. This score has a combination of Gareth Coker's previous works. It's got the grandiosity of Ark Survival Evolved and the whimsical delicacy of Ori and the Blind Forest. And like many on this list, it's an immense score. At over 3 hours long, I am keen to explore it much more in the future. So much good music already. Who made this list? This period crime drama soundtrack for Perry Mason Season 1 is ultra cool. It's rhythmic, jazzy, slick. There's a lot of sad, reverby piano in this soundtrack. It's kind of what makes up the bulk of it, and it suits the show really well. But I'm so glad it's balanced out by these defiant little, almost heroic motifs like the one you just heard. Very cool instrumentation. That's number 16, on to number 15. Tell you what, it is rare to see a comedy soundtrack on my list, but this is basically that. This is basically a comedy soundtrack. That said, it is lusciously orchestral with dancing flutes and cutesy melodies beautifully reprised throughout the length of this fun score. It's positively delightful, which leads me on to This is the only animated film score on my list, I think, and it is something special. It's heartbreakingly beautiful, often in a minimalistic, a Max Richter kind of way. It's a great example of music that can seem simple at first, but the more I listen to it, it just keeps growing on me and I discover new little details, you know? Thumbs up. Feel that pure springtime energy? I love having such a bright, fun and joyful action score on my list. It feels like walking in sunshine. Pemberton really knocked this one out of the park, but he usually does. Now, shifting gears. Love it or hate it, Tenet's soundtrack is pretty bloody wild, and personally I am down for its loud cacophonies, its fat beats and its really unique sense of rhythm. I'm glad that doing a Nolan film doesn't seem to have restrained Göransson. If anything, it's sent him even more off the hook. This is another relatively bright, breezy, optimistic, at times comedic, flight of whimsy, and I love it. There have been many years where actually I've found many of my favourite soundtracks are all just dark, brooding and chaotic, but this year that's absolutely not the case. Already on the list there's been so much colour to enjoy, and David Copperfield is absolutely one such entry. This score has luscious, optimistic strings which dance mesmerically. Well, 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 we're up to the top 10 now, and at number 10. I mentioned this one last year actually, but the official soundtrack hadn't been released then. Now we've got it and it's as excellent as expected. It's another mammoth, over 3 hours long, and it's got a few great memorable themes, loads of tight action cues, and basically if you blindfolded me, span me around 3 times, I'd be tricked I was listening to John Williams himself. Following last year's great score for his Dark Materials, Lorne Balfe is back for Series 2 and it's just as big, bold and magical as the first series. This is proper fantasy epic. I must admit I haven't seen any of the show itself, but as for the music, consider me a fan. Speaking of things I haven't seen, I have not seen this movie, The Witches, but Silvestri's score is a great success. It's got a lot of Ready Player One about it, I would say, including a very classical, big, bold and brassy main theme. I like that. I like that a lot. The Crown's Season 3 score was one of my favourites last year, and this follow-up does not disappoint. It reuses some of the same motifs and introduces some new ones which really work for me. Phipps manages to use these seemingly simple ornamentations, little flourishes, a drawn out whine of a note underneath a throbbing rhythm to just send a shiver down my spine. This is like a horror score to me, in the best way. I'm a massive fan of Warcraft's world of music. For decades now, they've been building a stable of some of my favourite fantasy music in existence. This latest release, Shadowlands, is actually one of my least favourite Warcraft collections of recent years, and it being at number 6 just shows how much I like the others. In my opinion, this is an average release from the Blizzard music team, which still means it's better than pretty much everything else out there. They create real magic over there. What are they, milking a murloc? And now for the top 5. At 5, it's another game score, and after having liked the work of Ilan Eshkeri for years now, I'm delighted to have finally found one of his scores that I truly love. Ghost of Tsushima takes a really poignant, considered approach to the sweeping epic score. If it isn't Gareth Coker again. After the magnificent Ori and the Blind Forest a few years ago, Ori and the Will of the Wisps was one of my most anticipated soundtracks of this year, and it didn't disappoint. Just as stunning and beautiful as the first. I haven't played any of these games yet, but just listening to these soundtracks has me dreaming of magical forests and magnificent creatures. Almost there. Top 5. Top 3. Top 3 time. So musical. John Powell's shown up with another banger this year too. It might not have quite the sentimentality of How to Train Your Dragon or the nostalgia of Solo, but there's a real puppy dog energy here, and it's got the same Powell pizzazz and dynamic orchestration as those previous hits. I've listened to this one so many times over the past year, and I'm indebted to it for keeping my spirits up. Zimmer's back, baby! This is probably my favourite Hans Zimmer score since Interstellar or The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Granted, it's not as original as either of those, but it's got this big, blockbuster Zimmer energy that I didn't realise I'd been missing so much over the past decade. It's channeling elements of Hannibal, Angels and Demons, Man of Steel, Gladiator, and Pirates of the Caribbean, among others. Overall though, I'm just so surprised and delighted that it's so much brighter and more upbeat than I was expecting. And it's lovely to hear Zimmer play with his own Wonder Woman theme introduced in Batman v Superman, and I love the regal and desperate villain theme they've put in this. It's got a sense of pure wonder and awe, this soundtrack. Top notch. Alright, and number 1. Carlos Rafael Rivera wasn't even a composer I was aware of until I heard this soundtrack, but here he is at the top of my list for 2020. I think this score is just brilliant. You know, it's about as good, I think, as a piano, string and flute-based period drama can be, and we all know there's a lot of those. When I watched the show on Netflix, I was enjoying the score for most of the show, but then it wasn't until the final episode where it all came together and clicked for me. I think this score maybe does this thing that I love, like First Man a few years ago, where it plants all these little motifs throughout the score, which eventually, at the end, all finally intertwine so dexterously that I'm just floored. I love it. But it's interesting, I don't think this one is more magical than Ori and the Will of the Wisps, or more fun than Call of the Wild, or more striking than Ghost of Tsushima, or more epic than Wonder Woman. But for whatever reason, it's just left an impression on me, and today, I say it's my number 1 soundtrack of 2020. Woo-wee, what a journey it has been. Well, there you go, future self. That is what you liked when you were me. And if anyone else happens to be watching, what have you been listening to? I'd adore to see your comments if you have any. Otherwise, till next year,